Today we have an exciting interview with Chalice. Chalice is a project engineer, or was at the time of the story that she's going to be sharing with us today. And our main topic is going to be about her experience with a high-profile ransomware that her company ran into. With that, Chalice, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So you had an experience that you told me about when we got introduced, because we were on a mutual trip where we're in the same engineering industry largely. And you mentioned that your company got hit by a high-profile ransomware. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that? Kind of introduce the story, and we'll jump into some questions.
Yeah, sure. It started out like a regular Monday as far as I was concerned. I was about ready to log on. I was still kind of working from home at the time. And all of a sudden, I get this text from my boss being like, hey, don't log on. Just like literally shut down your computer, hard shut off. Don't log on and do it the appropriate way. And then it was later on that day, I was like, well, am I going to get any work done? Like, I have clients that need my attention, blah, blah, blah. And come to find out, it was DarkSide had ransomwared us sometime either late Friday over the weekend. And so they had everything. And to avoid them getting onto, like, say, our personal devices, because I use my cell phone as a work phone too. They just wanted to make sure we were logged out of everything. So we had to go through that whole process of dealing with being ransomware. It was quite the experience to go through. About 2 weeks completely off work and having our whole tech team just scrambling to, especially during the pandemic when things were hard to find anyways, get our servers rebuilt.
So your IT team was pretty worried about the ransomware jumping from work to personal devices if you were to like remote in. But was that a problem for anyone? Did they successfully prevent the ransomware from jumping to personal machines?
Yeah, as far as I knew, no one had an issue jumping into anything personal, at least when it came to technology devices. There was the worry of like, because they got our whole company's database, they were able to go through and dig through basically all the HR files. So unfortunately, social security numbers, personal, like our personal email addresses, that they got that. So if you happen to use the same, password between all of your stuff, they had access to getting into your personal email and all that stuff. So
that's a great example of why it's important to have different passwords for everything, especially between work and personal, as work is probably going to be a higher target than personal for a group like this.
Typically, yeah. They're going to go after that, or they're going to go after Sears account, Old Navy account or something. They're going to be hitting the big conglomerates, and then they're hoping that you have the same information that you have with them and strike you through that personal means. But they're not going to attack someone personally, typically.
That reminds me of the Log4j vulnerability. Were you aware of that one when that one hit?
No, I wasn't.
It was around the same time. So it was like a 0-day that was in the infrastructure for a lot of websites. You know how you get like cookies and stuff that can be logged on your machine? Well, the log system was like log, then the number 4 and J. That was like the subtext for it in the program. And it had a loophole in it where you could get administrative privileges as an outside hacker going through. And it basically, in December, I want to say 2 years ago, compromised basically everyone's password. If you had a password, like you said, with Sears or Home Depot or Amazon or eBay, you needed to assume they had basically all been compromised because this vulnerability was so huge. And it was recommended like widely across the reporting on this that you change every password and just assume every password you've ever had was compromised.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Did you have to assume that with the ransomware?
Yeah, if you had anything that was slightly similar to what you used as your work password, it was just the best idea to go through and strip it all out and completely make up new ones. So that was quite remembering exactly what you have a password on. I think I had like a 2-page list by the time I was done with it between like all the accounts, because you don't think about like, oh, well, I signed up for SeatGeeks that one time to go to that one basketball game or something. Like all of that stuff you have to try to remember that you create a password for. Like there might be a vulnerability back through there, and especially if you input any type of credit card information, they can get a hold of that.
Did this experience open your eyes to like the importance of taking care of your passwords?
Oh my God, yeah. They have like all those different apps now that can store all of your passwords, but that's also a huge vulnerability. That means if someone breaks into there, they suddenly have all your passwords.
Or if you have on your computer, remember these passwords, and
Mm-hmm.
someone can, if they get into your computer, say
Mm-hmm.
use a common passcode for your laptop or your desktop machine at home,
Mm-hmm.
they get in, and then they can just go through all the accounts and hit remember passcode.
Mm-hmm. Really, the only safe way is to remember them yourself for the most part. I mean, if you have them to write them down at home, maybe in a journal or something, that might be safe because, I mean, someone would literally have to break into your place and get it that way. Because basically anything that's connected to the internet is vulnerable.
So out of the particular experience that you had with DarkSide and your company, what was the number one lesson that you learned beyond the passwords?
Well, I mean, we found out maybe about a week after the hacking happened that one of our principals in the company, someone tried to use his credit information and basically steal money and all that kind of stuff. So we found out like, okay, so they did definitely had our social security numbers and they were willing to use them. And so I had to lock down my credit.
Okay.
And I never thought that was going to be an issue. I've always been trying to be like really good about my financing and making sure I keep track of all of that. So but then to find out that now I have to freeze my accounts for no reason of my own. I just got a new car recently and I had to make sure like I unfroze it and I had to set it for like only a certain amount of time because my information is forever on the dark web now.
Did you have to go through and the Social Security Department get a new number entirely, or did it not go quite that far?
I didn't go quite that far. So my company was really forthcoming about everything that was happening. And so they've paid for all of us that worked for the company at the time to get consistent like dark web scans done to like make sure like your credit health and all of that stuff is still intact and like no one's trying to use your information or it hasn't been re-leaked again or bought.
Do they, as a result, also offer restoration services as an employee benefit for identity theft?
Yeah, I think especially for that one principal, I think he was the only like once we realized it happened to him, they were really quick about getting, everyone the information and the help they needed to prevent identity theft. But for him, yeah, I know they went through and helped and got him secured on that front. So haven't heard of anyone else needing that, but I don't know if that's something that they weren't trying to, freak everyone out about.
Right. Acquiring knowledge and how identity theft happens, ransomware attacks, cybersecurity in general, is that the best way you think to help prevent situations like this and help people protect themselves?
Oh yeah, like ever since that, my like weekly emails of like, hey, this is the newest identity theft we've been seeing. Like my company's been trying to like be really good about sending out that information. Or like, hey, like if the email seems questionable, like it probably is questionable. If it's too good to be true, it's probably just that. So like you were just supposed to forward the emails to them and they'll make sure everything seems fine. I mean, some of it's just as easy as hovering over the person's email address. And then from there, it will show if it's actually the correct email address or if it's being covered up by something.
On my personal email, I've been running into an issue where it says that the email I'm getting from the spammer or the hacker or the scammer, whoever, it's from me. It has my name on it. Have you seen that? Where it's like, it's got your full name on there and your email. And even if you hover over it, it looks like it's sent from you. And then they say, haha, we've hacked into your email and yada, yada, yada. And they go on and on, even though they don't actually have any access to your email. They just have like a little script to put your email up there.
They're basically all of it. So they're just trying to get you to click on the link or to call a person or do something like that to unintentionally give them access.
Okay, so you get an email like that, text message, anything like that. You just don't click any links associated with it. Don't respond to the emails. Don't bother with them.
Nope. Because if you haven't clicked on anything before that's questionable, then you're still safe.
I want to go back to what you said about freezing credit. Is that something you think everybody should do, even if they haven't experienced cybersecurity attack or identity theft? Do you think that they should freeze their credit with the 3 credit bureaus just out of precaution?
I think it's not a bad idea. I mean, it's not hard to do, and it's not hard to, like, if if you're a spur of the moment person, it might be a little bit annoying, but usually for me, I know when I'm planning to get a new loan or a new credit card or something, so I can plan ahead and unfreeze it for that day or those few hours to get that done, but it's not a bad thing. It doesn't keep like your, making on-time payments and all that stuff from reporting to the credit bureaus. you can do, like, anyone can do a soft credit check on you. It's just they can't have a full bore open new line of credit on you.
So that's how freezing your credit protects you.
Yeah.
It prevents opening new lines of credit, even if you tried to open a line of credit if it's frozen.
Yeah, they'll get usually a ping back for whatever service they're using saying it's been frozen. It either needs to be unfrozen or you're not the right person. Try again later.
That reminds me, because we've frozen our credit, my wife and I, and also for my 16-month-old son, because there's been cases where a kiddo grows up and they go to open their first credit card or they go to try to get their first mortgage, and they find that there's tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars taken out in debt in their name.
Wow.
Because their identity got stolen. Kids are actually very, very susceptible to that, because what 10-year-old kid, what infant is actually checking their credit report?
Yeah.
None of them. And so if someone gets a child's social security number, they can do that too. So it's some advice I've gotten that's been very helpful is to freeze your kiddos, the minors under your care.
I mean, that's an extremely good idea.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of terrifying to imagine being like a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old getting out into the world and all of a sudden everything in the way of credit is just trashed.
Yeah. And that's kind of how we work in the world anymore, is with credit. It's basically your proof of you're able to make the payments. You're trustworthy enough to ask for all that money to get, a house, a car, student loans for college.
And that's what a credit score means.
Yeah.
It's how likely are you to pay the loan back. So going back to the identity theft stuff, as a result of your experience, did you do any digging into the difference in safety for security for local backups versus cloud backups? Or maybe did your company say, okay, everything that was local was compromised, should we move to the cloud? Or like, what are your opinions?
Yeah, so I mean, local is about as secure as a company is going to get themselves if they're on top of their own security. The thing is, though, once it's compromised, you're basically either hoping that you had a backup right before the compromise happened, or that you're going to be able to rebuild the whole system quickly. I mean, it's a whole like rack server rebuild from ground up, and also then clearing out all the computers you have or laptops that are in the company, clearing them all out and starting them back from scratch. It's a whole process. Where with the cloud, you're relying on another company to provide that backup for you. So it happens more often, and they're just as liable for if something happens as your company is. So there's some give and take on either. I know since the attack on my company, we've kind of split on where we have stuff. Any of our new projects that are coming through are going to be more cloud-based. I mean, all the old ones, since they're already on our servers, that's where we're keeping them. But we're trying to keep the servers more about really privatized information.
Okay.
And really lock it down so it's only like admin rights can have access to it. So it's least likely to get in and have that compromised. Where, if, say, Microsoft gets compromised and they get that information, like, yeah, that's going to hurt us for a moment, but they have backups on backups. Like, they have server farms for a reason. So they should be able to get that back online for us quicker, and they're just as liable for everything that happened as we are.
So if you have a local network backup or a local hard drive that you back up your personal machine to, and say you always like to leave it plugged in when you're using your machine, or you have a laptop, you dock it and you got a hard drive there, what's to stop a hacker from, if they can compromise your machine, getting through your machine to the backup too? So
that's the whole point of like a backup, is you're only doing it like once a week or maybe once a day, depends on how much you set it up. But the second the backup's done, you need to make sure that it's like then disconnected, because you're right, like it can get compromised if it's always plugged in and always backing up. So you should have like a hard backup at least once a week or something, and then you disconnect it, and then you just re-update that once a week. And that's kind of where we were lucky. We did our hard backup every Friday.
Okay.
So when they compromised us over the weekend or really early on Monday, whenever it exactly happened, we had our hard backup that was completely safe, disconnected.
Okay.
To rebuild from.
It was unplugged.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, sometimes that's as simple as a switch. like that's internalized to the whole system. It doesn't have to be like an actual like physical disconnect, as long as there's a way where once it's done, there's a click of a switch to disconnect.
When you have the whole system compromised, be it your local machine or a company, for people who are listening, you have the backup. You want to rebuild from the backup. Is there any hope of reusing the physical hardware that got compromised by a ransomware or a malware, or do you have to start over completely with the hardware and rebuy all the hardware?
I know our company, I don't know if it was just to make sure that we didn't miss anything, like they rebuilt all of our racks from scratch.
Okay.
Got all that redone that way. But our laptops, they felt comfortable enough just wiping them completely, basically like a factory restart kind of situation on the laptops, and scrubbing the hard drives off of them. And then using the hard backup we had from that Friday to get all the information back on.
Okay.
So that's how my company handled it. I don't know if that's necessarily the correct way to do it. It's the way that our tech department felt comfortable with and knew that they would most likely keep, any further issues down the line. Although DarkSide didn't particularly take kindly to the fact that we knew how to rebuild our system so quickly and weren't willing to pay the ransom. So that was kind of an interesting thing to deal with after that.
So you say that they didn't take too kindly. What does that mean?
So they already had our IP address for our main server system during the hack. So because we didn't repay that ransom because we didn't need to, because we could rebuild our system, they tried to jam our IP address to keep us from working. And so we got shut. Like once we got up and running again, they basically shut us down for, I think, only a few hours, because getting a new IP address is as simple as calling your carrier, whoever's providing that IP address to you, and asking them to switch the number.
Interesting. That's it? You just call them up, say, this is my network, and I got to switch the IP.
Yeah, usually I think unless you have like a good reason, they'll probably put you in like a queue to switch it. But like obviously with us being, it was company work and we were getting jammed by ransomware people, they were willing to kind of push us to the forefront and get us a new IP address really quickly. So
Right, because time is money for you. But if it's like a home network and you're trying to reset the IP address, maybe you could wait a little bit or use the Wi-Fi at Starbucks or something for the time being. Did you have to change the IP address for your own home?
No, luckily not. Because before I was even able to log on, that's when I got the message from my boss. I didn't have to worry about any of my own home systems because I hadn't logged on between when they did it and when we were up and running again. So they had no access to my local stuff.
It's something that I've been thinking about. You see a lot of ads on YouTube and podcasts and the like for VPNs. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the VPN stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all over the place. If that successfully hides your IP address and traffic so that you never have to worry about that. I haven't looked into it enough to know. Do you have any insight on that?
I do know that for a while, until we knew we were okay, I guess, we were switching between different VPN companies, basically. And we finally settled on one, but it's definitely something where my company paid a lot of attention to that. And whether that actually was what helped also keep a lot of our users' home addresses safe, I'm sure that was helpful in that. But we definitely did change VPN companies after the hack, and then a few times after that.
So springboarding off of the VPN stuff, everyone sees ads for that and other things for like local security, cybersecurity, identity theft prevention. I've talked with some people, even in my family. I'm not going to say exactly who, but they're I don't worry in particular about what data is getting recorded out of my network, or I don't worry too much about cybersecurity threats. I just don't go to any sketchy websites. And if they like took over my computer, I don't have anything of value for them to actually take. How would you inspire someone who's somewhat indifferent about it to recognize the importance of protecting their identity and going through the due diligence of having appropriate levels of cybersecurity on their own personal stuff?
The easiest way to explain this is knowledge is money. That's power. So if anyone can get that much knowledge on you personally, that's power they have over your life. Your credit score, as long as you have a credit score over 600, people can take out a lot of money off of you, and you're not going to be able to do anything because they have the correct information until it's already too late. your credit's already been damaged at that point. And, they say they're going to like help you and everything, but that takes a while for that to actually go into effect and backtrack and go through all the litigation of what was actually something you did and what was they did. And you have to have the proof. And it's a lot of extra time and your own personal money that it's, to me, not worth it when it's as simple as, going on and either paying for something that monitors your credit for you or just freezing your credit yourself, which takes really not that much time at all. It's one of the first things when you start like typing in like a Experian freeze. It's the first link that pops up for you to be able to sign into your own credit and freeze it there. It's so simple, and it's, time is money. I'd rather not lose all the money I've worked really hard to get for myself.
So even if someone doesn't feel like they have a lot of assets or anything of value, they could still have debt taken out in their name through identity theft or through a cybersecurity vulnerability. And when that happens, it's not that they're taking what you don't have to lose. It's like they're literally taking out money in your name that until you can prove it was fraudulent, people think you're technically liable for it.
Yes. Sometimes it can take a year or two to get through all of that. So that's 2 years of me possibly paying on stuff that I didn't even do.
And that's personally why I really like restoration services when it comes to identity theft. Because if someone does a good enough job taking your identity, it becomes a full-time job for years, potentially trying to regain just control of your credit score, your social security number, all that. Restoration services, I think, cap out at millions of dollars worth of private services where they assign an agent who does all that restoration work for you. And you just have to then be patient for that time. But it still sucks waiting for things to get resolved.
Yeah, because that puts your life on pause. Like, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the world that rely on their credit cards to live off of. And your whole credit gets frozen during that whole process. So you're living paycheck to paycheck, hoping you can still pay your house loan, your car loan, your student loans, if you have those, like all of that stuff just out of pocket. And some people just don't have that without access to credit services or their, bank.
A question I had when I first heard about freezing credit in this vein, if I have a credit card and I freeze my credit, does that mean I can't use my credit card anymore?
Oh, no. No, you can still use your credit card. It still records when you make on-time payments, all of that kind of stuff. You can't just open new credit. So like you already have a line of credit on that credit card. Okay. And you can even increase that line of credit. It's opening new ones. So if you were to ask for like a new credit card for like, say you want the Amazon credit card that you don't have yet, that's a new line of credit with a new company. And that's when you'd have to go in and unfreeze your credit for them to do basically like a hard pull and open up a new line of credit.
Okay. So if someone freezes their credit, but they still have credit cards, it's possible that an identity theft criminal, someone who might be using, like, say, a skimmer or some sort of scanner to hit the chip by walking by an RFID scanner type thing, that they could still get a hold of credit card information or debit card information, and they could still spend money in your name that way.
Yes.
So is that the only vulnerability you're aware of? If you freeze your credit, you have identity theft, protection, scanning, restoration in place. But if you still are using plastic, is that the only vulnerability you see there? Is there some other way that you think people need to be like extra leery?
I mean, that's really the one I can think of. I mean, obviously your social security number should be, I mean, you can, but it's ridiculously hard to get a whole new social security number. The whole idea is you never have to get a whole new one.
Right.
And that's what can take sometimes years to do. And you have to prove why you need a new one. So, but yeah, that's probably, after freezing your credit, the most vulnerable thing. Granted, most credit companies are required to have so much insurance on your cards. Like I've had a few times where like all of a sudden I'll get like a random charge from like somewhere else. Some hackers got in and stole that whole company's credit information. I think it was when I lived back down in Texas, and I was making purchases in Texas on this card, and all of a sudden it said that there's purchases in New York happening on this card. And I mean, luckily the credit card company actually called me first. They're like, hey, like your address says you're in Dallas. Like, and you're making purchases down there right now. Like, can you confirm that's your current location? I'm like, yes. Is there something wrong? They're like, there's been charges off of your account in New York. So we're just going to decline all of those and make sure anything that was done with that charge account was refunded back to you. Like, most credit card companies have tools to do that. It's just some of them you aren't necessarily good about helping you out in that without you pushing them to do it.
Okay.
Like, it's a good idea to go in and check your credit card statements and make sure all of them were actually done by you.
Or if you frequently use a debit card, check your checking account and be looking at the transactions there. I've run into it 2 or 3 times where on either kind of card that I'm using, I see a fraudulent charge of sorts.
Yeah.
One time, I remember swiping my card at a gas station, and actually, it was when my wife and I were dating. We went to the gas station, and I almost never did this because I was like super paranoid of skimmers back in college. And I said, "Here, you can fill up the card." And I hand her my card to swipe at the pump, and she got out and filled it up. Got back in. We got a call later that afternoon saying, "Hey, you filled up here." There were skimmers that were found on the pumps here, so we are just canceling the debit card now. We are just putting freeze on everything. When you go and you swipe your card on anything, do you ever check for little skimmers or?
I try to pay attention to that. That's why I like the ones where like you actually just like wave the card over it. Like, yeah. Yeah, because like those are like, it's very obvious if they've added some chunky hardware to whatever you're scanning to try to get your information that way.
When someone was charging on your card in New York, they probably didn't like need physical access to your card to get the information and start running charges off of it. Was that a cyber vulnerability, you suspect?
Yeah, it had to have been something like that because I think they were doing like, they ordered like a bunch of like DoorDash and Lyfts and that kind of stuff. So I think they were doing like all like online purchases. So they had like my credit card number. Yeah, they must have just had that information, was just entering it online. They weren't showing in person. They didn't have a physical card. That's how that's how they were doing all the charges.
And the only way to protect against that is just really watching for if someone ever gets that information by guessing it or hacking a company where you've used your card online before.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question I want to ask. My wife and I both have older iPhones, and they just got old enough that the OS doesn't update on them anymore. Like, they've got the new fancy lock screen on the iPhones where you can customize them and stuff, and you can actually finally go back and edit text messages. When an OS goes out of date, be it for a phone or a laptop, whatever technology you have, and it's no longer being kept up to date with security updates being pushed by Microsoft or Apple, whoever, is that a major security vulnerability you're sensitive to? What are your opinions on that? And is it worth paying a bunch of money to upgrade technology that has basically built-in software obsolescence to it?
Yeah, I feel like anytime you let any type of security system lapse in getting updated, there is that vulnerability there, because the whole idea of you updating it is because they found a new way that hackers or scammers or whatnot are getting through the current system. So the constant updating of that is, I think, an important thing. Granted, I'm no expert necessarily on this. I've just done my own research after dealing with it. Whenever my Dell says like, hey, we have a new update for the security system, it's not even like, oh, I'll do that later on at night. I instantly think about like, okay, I'm just going to like save out where I'm at. I don't have a meeting anytime soon, and I'm going to do like the whole update restart of the computer, because I'd rather not have that vulnerability. Even when you get rid of an old phone, I would never necessarily get rid of it. I keep all of mine, or at least pull out all the SIMS cards, because people can just get the SIMS card and do so much with that information too. Really? That's on the phone. Yeah, they could just, like, that's a whole chunk of information they have on you. The memory card and the SIM card, they can just take that, plug that in, and then all of a sudden they have access to whatever you had on your phone the last time. Or even like if I'm like trading it in at like the Apple store or something, like I make sure that they give me that, because it's my property. It has my information on it. I'm selling them back the actual hardware of the phone, not the memory storage to it.
Interesting. I had a laptop where I could take it apart and take the hard drive out. And I remember upgrading the hard drive to a solid state drive. It was one of those older ones that still had, the hard disk, and you could hear it. If you set it down too hard, you could hear it lock, the hard drive lock and stuff. But I remember taking it out because when you go and you wipe and you erase a device, it doesn't actually completely eliminate the data that's on there. It just says this is available space for your hardware to write onto.
Mm-hmm.
So it still preserves that old information unless you do like a thorough scrub.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up destroying that old hard drive with a sledgehammer and a rock.
Yep.
It was really fun. I also ran into a company situation where I worked on a historical building for the government that had like some really sensitive information on it.
Mm-hmm.
It was an internship a long time ago. And I ended up having to not only burn all my notes, but sign something that said I would physically destroy all the hardware, the computer hardware that I used to work on it, so that it didn't have any persistence anywhere. And it all had to be local, which was fascinating. Anyway, I think this was a really insightful conversation, and I thank you for coming on and talking about it. I think cybersecurity and identity theft prevention and just spreading knowledge about that on how we can better take care of ourselves and protect ourselves from those who have criminal intentions. It's really important, and it relates very strongly to personal finance. As I mean, we talked about, we bled into that topic so many times. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest things you're trying to protect is your financial security.
Yeah, 100%. I was in the boat of like, oh, it'll never happen to me, and then it did.
Right. When it comes to identity theft in particular, I've always been told it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that they're protected against that and doing everything they can to avoid the most severe cases as much as possible. So thank you for sharing your experience,
Yeah, no problem.
your opinions and your knowledge that came out of that. It was very valuable for me, and I hope it was very valuable for all of you listening. And until next time, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.